May I have the gentlemen that are going to be pallbearers please come out to the front?
I brought my raincoat. It wasn't that rain. I didn't bring it. Just rain. That's yeah.
Oh, did you? Oh, yeah, literally Sunday afternoon. I would love to see it. Right? Oh, did you? Yeah, that's where I see a bunch of his brother's been and Jasper. He's hanging around the house even. He stayed there and took care of Jack for a couple of days. Just moved to Rachel. Her husband been to Atlanta. Yeah, very rich. Yes, yeah. Yeah. It was actually in that story yesterday. My bed is her furniture. So I was going out. When he called me, he's like, I told him that. Stop by the whole house. Text Michael. He called me. He told him, standing there. Heads up. Did you text Michael? Yeah, he just said he wasn't here. Like, okay. So, yeah. He's doing great.
today to honor the memory of Louis Kirshstein, and many of us as Uncle Louis, Eliezer Ben Abraham. We're going to begin today's service with a recitation of the Tehillim. We're honored to have one of our other local rabbis with us, Rabbi Dixie Repson, and call on Rabbi Repson to read a chapter of Psalms for us.
Mizmor David, Adonai Roy Eloi Echzar, Binos Deshe Yarbitseni, Almei Menuchos Yinahaleni, Nafshi Yishove Yancheni, V'maglei Tzedek Laman Shemo, Gam Kielech Begeit Salmoves Loira Ra, Ki Atay Madi, Shiftecha Umishantecha Hema Yinachmuni, Taroch Lafanai Shulchan Neged Sorur, Deshanta Bashem and Rosh Ikosi Ravoya, Achtov v'chesed yordefuni kol yimei chayai. V'shavti b'beis Adonai v'orech ganu.
I'm going to read an additional Psalm, Psalm 1. Ish asher l'malach ba'atzas v'shayim. Sara Sneg Kirshtein, Yegeh Yom Halayla. Yah Ke'etz Shasul Al Pal Gemayeh. Asher Pirtei Piryo Yitain B'Yito V'Yalei Lo Yibo V'Chol Asher Ya'aseh Yatzliach. V'Chein HaRishayim Ki Kamot Asher Tifanu V'Rach. Al Kein Lo Yakumu Rishayim B'Mishpat V'Chatei Manas Tzadikim V'Yad Derech Tzadikim V'Derech Rishayim Tovei. We're going to be hearing words of eulogy from members of Louis' family, followed by myself. We'll first be hearing from Louis' daughter, Lisa Shloven, followed by some of Louis' grandchildren, Edith, Emma, and Yehuda.
Thank you all for coming. I had told my dad that there was going to be a day in my life where I was going to need him more than ever, and that's today. So I wrote some things down because you don't want to be sitting here for 2 hours while I ramble, and so I hope you'll bear with me. I just want to start by saying, those of you who knew my dad, he loved his family. He loved his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. He loved his brothers, his sisters-in-law, whom he considered sisters, and all of my cousins. He loved all of you, and so he would be so touched that you're here. And in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Father, Chapter 1, Mishnah 2, Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous, said, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Amed. On 3 things the world stands, 3 principles, 3 pillars hold up this precarious world in which we live. And they are these: Al HaTorah, on the Torah, the Word of God; V'al HaAvudah, and on service in the name of Hashem; V'al Gemilut Chasadim, and on acts of loving kindness. It is with the greatest pride, tempered only by the deepest sorrow, that I have the honor to stand before you today to say that my father, Louis Kirshstein, stood for all 3 of those things. My father was born on the Shabbos, October 16, 1926, which was the 8th day of Cheshvan in the year 5687, the 3rd of 5 children born to my grandparents of Blessed Mary, Abe and Edith Kirshstein. Neither the oldest nor the youngest, neither the smartest nor the fairest of faith. My father first established himself by being the tallest, and in my opinion, the most devoted to family, to community, and to God. So if you'll allow me, I'll take a few moments to illustrate how my father's life reflected the 3 pillars on which our world stands. Al HaTorah, on the Torah, the Word of God, and the study of Torah. My father loved Yiddishkeit. He loved being a Jew. He read books on the Torah and on Judaism. He attended lunch and learned whenever he could. He posed countless of questions to the rabbis, some of which were thought-provoking and some of which were absolutely maddening. The nuances and intricacies of the written and oral laws of Judaism fascinated my father, and he spent his life learning and growing in the knowledge of the faith that he held so dear, B'al ha'avodah, and on service in the name of Hashem. My father davened 3 times a day. I remember as a child seeing my father, his tefillin bound up his left arm and wrapped on his head with his tallis around him, davening Shacharis morning prayers. And then later, if he didn't go to Minyan, he would daven both Mincha and Maariv at home. During the last year of his life, my father remarked that he was the oldest person in Charleston who still put on tefillin. Although there was a slight smile on his face, there was also a quiet sadness that he was left alone to do this mitzvah. Toward the end of his life, my father became too ill to lay tefillin. And one of the most impactful moments of his life, for me, I feel for Dad, and for my niece Edith, who was there that day, was when Rabbi Avi Sharfman of Gilchrist Hospice came, and he put tefillin on Dad and wrapped him in the tallis that he had received as outgoing president of BSBI. Dad loved going to shul, and I remember as a child walking with him to go to shul on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Now you have to appreciate Dad was 6'1" and 3/4", and he was all legs. So here he is striding to shul, and here I am running after him, saying, "Daddy, don't walk so fast." At which time he would turn around and sing that Wayne Newton song, "Daddy, don't you walk so fast." I have to tell you, I hate that song. Dad was instrumental in the development of the Minyan House, and he enjoyed going there to daven on Shabbos and Yom Tov, to be with other members of the community, and give candy to any child who was present. Dad was involved in synagogue life, chairing committees over the years, and serving as president for 1 year. He said 1 year was more than enough. Dad was also an avid supporter of the Addlestone Hebrew Academy and served on the board of the school, where he was bestowed the honor of being one of the honorary lifetime board chairs. I'm going to digress from a moment from the 3 pillars just to mention something else. Dad also loved a different type of work and was engaged in that his entire life, and that is of our family business. Dad loved the family business and loved working alongside of his father and his brothers, and then his sons and then his nephews, in making this a successful venture for both my nuclear and our extended families. He went to the store early in the morning to get a jump on his work and worked until late in the evening, either at the store or at home to finish up. If a customer wanted to meet my father before the store opened, my father would gladly oblige. If a customer knocked on the door after the store had closed, my father would open up the store for him. He established, my dad, a very successful debit route on the outer islands of Charleston County and referred to the customers out there as his country cousins. Their feelings for him were mutual, and over the years, many of his customers reached out to him to help in purchasing items not carried by the store, things like lawnmowers and cars. They even trusted him, they said, and they knew that he would do right by them, which he did. But now I'll return to my original premise of the 3 pillars holding up our world. V'al gemilut chasadim, an act of loving kindness. Here, of all places, I think my father shined the brightest of all. He gave tzedakah, charity, to many causes, but especially Jewish causes, both in the United States and in Israel. He anonymously bought honors for people in shul, on holidays, and on Shabbos, with the proviso that the honoree would never be told from whom the honor was given. He served on the Chevra Kadisha of the community, quietly and reverently preparing the deceased of our community for interment. Dad once told me that when his father found out he was a member of the Chevra Kadisha, my grandfather asked my father why my father had not told him that he was on the committee. My father replied that there was nothing to tell. There was a need, and he was able-bodied, so he did it. My grandfather responded that he himself would not have been able to be on that committee. My father enjoyed buying those large Jewish calendars. I don't know if you ever got one. Huge Jewish calendars, and giving them out to family and friends. He even bought many copies of the Ezra's Torah English Luach to give to people. And this little book, a copy of which he kept as well, provided some essential information to support living Judaically. He bought gefilte fish, candy, sodas for Pesach, and happily gave them out for people. Dad was very upset when he found out his favorite gefilte fish was no longer made. We searched high and low, but we could not find that flipping gefilte fish. And one day, my son Judah and I were in one of the kosher markets in Baltimore called Market Maven, and there was a gefilte fish, the big, huge can. And Judah said to me, "Mom, Zeta's coming up here. Let's build a tower of gefilte fish." And we did. 6 cans of gefilte fish stacked like that. And when Dad came and went into the master bedroom, Judah said, "Look, Dad, gefilte fish." And Dad was so happy. Dad's generosity was not limited to the people he knew. I was fortunate enough to speak with a dear friend of Dad's recently, Ginny Benjamin, who shared a story with me. Dad was told by Ginny's husband, Jose of blessed memory, that an older lady had fallen on hard times and was living in less ideal conditions. Dr. Benjamin related that her husband received a phone call from that woman soon after she had told him this information, in which she reported that this big truck drove up and these big men got out, and they took out all her broken appliances and furniture and brought in all new appliances and furniture. She didn't know who this person was, but she was very grateful. The Benjamins, however, knew. They knew it was my father, not even knowing who this woman was, who delivered an entire house of new appliances and furniture. I was fortunate enough to have my father live with me for the last 5 months of his life. When I introduced the idea of coming to Baltimore to live with me, my father said he didn't want to be a burden. I told him, "You have given and given and given your whole life, and now I finally have an opportunity to get back." It took some arm twisting and a serious illness, but we finally got my father to leave the community he loved so much, and my sister and I made sure he received the best care possible. I even managed to get his home phone number ported to a cell phone, which delighted him greatly. I want to take just a few minutes longer to mention a few people who supported Dad and our family in these last few months. The first of which are Lolly and Kenny Fox. They were our eyes and ears in Charleston because we couldn't be here, especially during the pandemic. We were scared, Linda and I, that we would bring something to our dad, that we would make him sick. And we would talk to him constantly, but we couldn't be there. And without Lolly and Kenny, we wouldn't have known what was going on. They bought him groceries. They kept him company. They took him to doctor's appointments. And they were even the ones who saved his life on that Friday when he felt so gravely ill. And I don't think my sister can ever say thank you enough. My son Judah. Judah had this amazing way of communicating with my father and reassuring him even when he became confused and anxious. He could calm my father when he became upset and soothe him with his calm and caring voice. Understand, please, that when my father got upset, so did I. His stress level broke up my stress level, which broke up his stress level, and we were a mess. Judah, however, could come in and calm everything down. There were many times that Judah was called upon to go above and beyond anything, and he did so with gratitude and a glad heart because he loved his Zeta very much. Linda and I want to thank Gilchrist Hospice, the staff of the hospice program who went above and beyond to support Dad and us during the final weeks of his life. It was through Gilchrist Hospice, that we met Rabbi Avi Sharfman, who came to support Dad on the final day of his life by laying tefillin and spending time with him, and who came the day after he died to support us in our grief, and came back that night to bring me a book on halacha and Jewish mourning, my niece Edith framework. When I had to go to Houston to support my daughter and help my husband, who was about to have open heart surgery, see, everybody knows now, my sister Linda took over as balabuster, making sure the house ran smoothly and Dad was well cared for. When my sister had to return home, it was Edie who took over, coming from Chicago to make sure things were handled. Edie knew things were getting seriously worrisome in the last few weeks of my father's life, and she called me not to ask, but to inform me that she was coming back. Only 1 month from when she had first come. She was coming back because she wanted to help her Zeta, and she wanted to support Judah and me. I don't think I could have made it through those days and those last few weeks without her, and I'll never be able to thank her enough. The caregiving agency called Caregiver Staffing was staffed by a mother-daughter team of Allison and Christina, who were thoroughly devoted to my father and committed to finding him the best caregivers ever. Allison texted me regularly to ask how my father was doing and offer support. Allison and Christina gave my father, Judah, and me 3 wonderful gifts. The first gift was Vanessa, our weekend and fill-in caregiver. With her calm demeanor, kind heart, and professionalism, Vanessa provided excellent care for my father. The second gift was Jamie, who became my father's nighttime caregiver. Jamie's knowledge, her professionalism, and her loving spirit helped make the nighttime safe for my father. Ever patient and always in good humor, because she had to be with Dad. Jamie met her nightly duties with a warmth and lightness that allowed me to sleep at night, knowing my father was in good hands. And the third and most precious gift of all was Kiana, who was my father's regular daytime caregiver. Every morning, Kiana, who, by the way, is all of 24 years old, would walk into the house with a brightness and a cheerfulness that would light up even the dreariest of days. As she would walk by me, I would look for her angel's wings because I knew they were there. She just hid them so well. My father grew to love Kiana and paid her one of the highest compliments, that of telling her, "We need to find you a husband." Judah and I grew to love Kiana as well. When my father was awake, Kiana would keep him engaged in brain-stimulating activities such as word searches, jumble puzzles, and Dad's favorite, blackjack on his grandpad. They would listen to music together, and even though there were times I wanted to pull my hair out if I had to listen to that same song again, Kiana was unfazed by Dad's love of repetitive music. My father also loved teaching her Hebrew. When it was time for Kiana to help my father up, she would say, "Okay, Mr. Lewis, we're going to a mode. On 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3, a mode." The first time I ever heard that, I came out of my office. I couldn't believe it. And Kiana was just smiling. She got him up. He was had his welcome, and away they were going. When my dad was asleep, Kiana would clean his bedroom and bathroom, do his laundry, wash his dishes. If she still had time, she would quietly attend to her studies in pursuit of a nursing degree. I will never be able, on behalf of my father, my sister, my son, and myself, adequately thank Kiana for all she has done for us. The world stands on 3 pillars, pillars which my father embraced his whole life. May his name be for a blessing, and may his neshama have an aliyah. Mr. Louis, Mr. Lewis, or Uncle Louis, or Big Zena, or Dad. But I'm among the blessed few. We call him Zeta. 20 years ago, my Zeta taught me a valuable lesson. He showed me what true compassion and exemplary love looks like. 20 years ago, because of Zeta's compassion and love, my body, a blessing my name, was able to leave us surrounded by the people she loved, and that loved her, and with the utmost of dignity. That was a gift he gave not only her, but to all of us, and I have cherished it, kept it close to my heart ever since.
to relearn the lesson from 20 years ago. Repay the gift of time with my bubby he'd given me that I would. The last 2 weeks I spent with Ada and Elisa and Judah were a privilege and a bracha and an honor. And I can only hope that I was able to relate even a fraction of the compassion and love I saw from my Zeta 20 years ago. Zeta used to sing me a song. It's called Pretty Blue Eyes by Steve Lawrence. And he would sing it to me all the time when I was young. And when I would call him on the phone, he would sing it to me. And when I heard that he was really sick, I found it and I put it on a playlist. I flew into Charleston Tuesday night, and I was listening to that playlist. And as the plane was coming down, and as the plane was touching down, the songs changed. And as the wheels hit the ground, that song came on, and I lost it. And then I was immediately comforted by my Zeta. Thank you, Zeta. I love you still. I love you forever. I miss you more than words can say. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emma Schloven. I am Lisa's eldest, and Louis Kirshstein's youngest granddaughter. I've been racking my brain trying to put words on paper that capture my beautiful memories of my Zeta, of our time together and his impact on my life. And for days now, this paper in my hand has remained empty, blank. A really rather startling turn of events for someone who works with words for a living. But Zeta always used to tell me time, patience, and perseverance accomplishes all things. It's a lesson he learned from his father, Papa, and one he passed on to me. I'd heard the lesson over and over throughout the years, nodding my head and occasionally rolling my eyes as I recited the words silently along with him, but they clearly stuck, because this morning, after countless hours of trying, this speech appeared. Zeta was many things to so many people, Upaloo to most of you here, I assume. But for me, he was always about stories. From a young age, I remember him regaling me with tales of mischief from his youth, of gum that grew on ceilings of bedrooms, and family gatherings around a holiday table, of school essays gone awry and army days, stories of Stuhr and trips to the country filled with wonderful characters that swam down the phone line between Charleston and Baltimore, shortening the distance between us. And don't even get me started on all of the bad jokes. Like, did you know that the first baseball game in history happened in the Torah? Like, in Bereshit, it begins in the big inning. Over the years, our weekly conversation shifted to my own stories. Few were more supportive of my journalism career than Zeta, and who on every phone call would ask me what story I was working on, which famous person I was chatting with that week, and if I'd been made editor-in-chief yet. My love of stories, of listening to them, holding them close, and most importantly, of sharing them with others, is a gift I attribute to Zeta. one I carry in my heart one I'll carry in my heart long past when I can type on a keyboard or hold a pen in my hand. And I hope his glorious adventures fill my head forever. I love you, Micho Ligatiyah. Not always well.
I am the youngest of the grandchildren. I do not have my sister's eloquence. I speak with a stutter and lisp. I do not have my mother's conviction, my aunt's emotion. I do not have my cousin's calm stoicism, or the endless reserves of love, yea, that so many others do. I simply happened to be in the right place in the right time, and it was my privilege and honor to care for my grandfather. I don't have much to say that hasn't already been said, but I do have one final revelation. An hour before my grandfather was pronounced to have left this world, I woke from a dead slumber. I walked upstairs in the dark. I couldn't tell you what had woken me. Something was amiss. Exactly 1 hour before the pronouncement of death, I came to check on my grandfather and found him sleeping peacefully. His breaths were calm and measured, and he exited this world in peace. I think it would be his request that I pass that information on. Perhaps it will bring some peace to some of those who grieve. That in the end, he left to join his family at peace. For all of those of you who have given us support, thank you. It cannot be understated how much visits from his 2 grandsons who lived in the area, calls from his other grandchildren, from his daughter, the opportunity to speak with his brothers meant to him. And those days he would smile. I thank all of you. This was the family that my grandfather spoke about. The family that brought him pride. And it's wonderful to see that all of you felt that same pride in him.
Louis was a man who was very much devoted to prayer. So I thought I would turn to the Siddur for my remarks this morning. There's a prayer that we will be adding to the service this coming Shabbos, a prayer that's known as Birkas HaChodesh, a blessing of the new month, which is recited in the Shabbos in advance of Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the Jewish month. And as we head into the new Jewish month, the month of Elul, and just 2 days from now on Shabbos, we'll be saying this prayer, the blessing of the new month. And the prayer of the new month is a prayer of optimism, and is a prayer that reflects on our values as Jewish people. And I was looking through the prayer this week and thinking about what our lives should look like. It's hard not to notice when speaking to members of the Kirshstein family that the prayer is a description of the life of Louis Kirshstein. We pray that God should fill our months and our lives with shalom, with tova, with bracha, with peace, with goodness, with blessing. And we ask that God allow us to live lives shetehi banu ahavas Torah, yiras shamayim. We should live with a love of Torah and Judaism, and we should live with a fear of heaven. I think Uncle Louis, as he introduced himself to me, Uncle Louis was a person who was devoted to these values. Anyone who knows Louis or heard the speeches that we just heard from members of the family know that Louis was a person who lived with a fear and a love of his Maker in heaven. When I first spoke to Louis over the phone, joined the community during COVID, so most of my first interactions with people were over the phone. And one of the first things that he told me, as you mentioned before, was that, Rabbi, you should know, I'm one of the oldest people in Charleston who still wears tefillin every day. And I was quite impressed that this man, alone during COVID, an older man, was wearing tefillin each and every day. But I found out more recently that his wearing tefillin each day was quite an understatement. It wasn't just that he wore the tefillin each day. Louis was a man who was devoted to God in heaven. He was devoted to prayer. He prayed 3 times a day. If he wasn't able to make it to shul in his younger age, he would wear the tefillin at the kitchen table. It was the image that the children would see as they went downstairs in the morning. They would see their father wearing the talis and tefillin. And prayer was not just something that Louis engaged in, but prayer became part of his personality, part of who he was. We just heard the beautiful story with the caretaker, of him telling the caretaker, Amod, Amod. And it wasn't just a random Hebrew word. It's a word that's part of the service. It's a part of the morning service. It's the word that's used to call someone up to the Torah. To Louis, these words became part of his life and part of his personality. And for someone so devoted to prayer, it becomes more than just a person's personality. It becomes really the core of who the person was. Linda was telling me how quite recently Louis wasn't fully aware, he wasn't fully aware of what was going on. And he would sometimes be praying multiple times a day. He would be praying the Shachris, and he had already prayed the Shachris, he had already prayed the morning prayers. And there was a question, should we tell him? Should we tell him, you already prayed, it's time to close the siddur, and it's time to do something else. And the truth is, it didn't take much thought from the family to decide whether to tell him to close the siddur, because it was a question that had been answered, a question that had been answered many years earlier, when Louis' father took ill, and Louis' father did the exact same thing. And Louis' father, at the end of his life, was praying constantly. I was praying the prayers again and again. And Louis himself answered the question. Louis said, my father's not hurting anyone. We should allow him to keep praying. His father passed away when he was 94. Louis passed away when he was 94. And following in his father's legacy, he was a man who was devoted to prayer, became part of his personality and part of his essence. And even when he began losing some of his faculties, prayer was always a part of who he was. Our sages tell us, Halavai sheyispal el adam kulo kol hayom. If a person should really be engaged in prayer the entire day. Of course, we can't pray the entire day. We have so many needs to attend to live our lives. But sometimes a person has the opportunity at the end of life to be able to pray the entire day. And it wasn't just about prayer. He loved reading anything. He loved reading, and he loved reading things that were Jewish. He loved reading Judaic works. And we heard about the big luach that he had, again, as a symbol of prayer, to see the calendar of the Jewish year, to understand which prayers are said which day, which prayers are to be omitted. He was a person who, unfortunately, I didn't get to see this part of him. He was incredibly involved with our synagogue, with Brith Sholom Beth Israel. He was incredibly involved with the Jewish school in Charleston. But it really began even as a young man. As a young man, just 19, 20 years old, he was serving in the army, and he demanded to be furloughed for the high holidays. He said he couldn't imagine being away from his synagogue for the high holidays. And when his general and lieutenant, when they refused to allow him to furlough, he threatened to go AWOL. He said he was going to run away from the army. He needed to be back for the high holidays. Fortunately, one of the chaplains intervened, and he was able to go home for the high holidays. But you see throughout his entire life, his devotion to prayer, to the synagogue. In addition to his life of sincere devotion to the Almighty, He lived the life that we read in that prayer as well in the Birkas HaChodesh, not just of Yiras Shamayim, the Yiras Faith, the fear, love of heaven, but also a Chaim Shel Tova, Chaim Shel Bracha, Chaim Shel Parnasa. He lived a life of peace, a life of goodness. And we just heard from Judah how he passed away, in a calm way. He passed away in peace. And it's very fitting that he would pass away in peace because he lived his life in peace. He was a kind, he was gentle, he was a patient person. And not just with members of the family, but with strangers, with absolute strangers. As we heard, he'd go out to business on the Sundays, and he would treat everyone with respect when he was in the country, as he called it. And there was one time where one of the customers said, the reason we come back to you is because even though you're from the big city, you come down to our level. And he was upset to hear that. He told them, I don't come down to your level. We're all on the same level. That he really believed in mankind. He was a Southern gentleman, a man of honor, and he was a person whose word was worth very much. If he gave you his word, you knew you had his commitment. One of the grandchildren was commenting last night that on his cab ride back to the house from the airport, he was talking to the cab driver, and he told the cab driver that he's coming for his grandfather's funeral, and the cab driver, he asked him his name, who passed away. He said it was Louis Kirshstein. And the cab driver said, your grandfather was a great friend. In his words, a great friend to the African-American community. He was a person who looked beyond his family, beyond his community. He really respected and he cared for all of mankind. And of course, as we just heard, we saw from the family, he was an extremely family-oriented man. He was a loving husband, he was a loving brother, he was a loving father, a loving grandfather, great-grandfather. Even he was a tall man, as we know. When he would come to playing with the children, he'd crouch down, he'd crouch into a small little tent, whatever it took to play with the children, he would do anything for them. And I heard people were telling me about Louis, that Louis was a person who would never say no. If somebody asked for something, he would never say no, he would always give. Perhaps what's more remarkable than never saying no is always looking for opportunities to say yes, to actually go out and look for opportunities to do for others. And perhaps one of the most notable and remarkable decisions that he made during his lifetime is when his mother-in-law, when his father-in-law passed away, so her mother-in-law was going to be living alone, and he knew that it would be very difficult for her financially and the loneliness, and he used his experience as a salesman to try to think about how exactly he would sell this to her. How would he get her to move in with him? It wasn't that she was begging to move in, quite the opposite. He was trying to convince her to move into the home, and he had to explain to her how she would be doing their family a favor, that it would be a service to the family to be able to help out because he was away at work so much. She could help them with the cooking. He found a way to show honor and dignity to his mother-in-law. And for over 25 years, deteriorating health, she lived together with him and with the family. And he never complained, he never questioned the decision, and he was always happy to pay whatever medical bills, whatever was necessary to support. He was certainly a community man. One of the members of the community told me how many years ago, before Rosh Hashanah, that Louis would always stop by the house to give them a strawberry cake made by his wife, who was famous for this strawberry cake. But Louis would go around delivering these strawberry cakes before the Rosh Hashanah. And it was remarkable because I was speaking to someone else in the community, somebody much younger who moved into the community just in the last 10 years, and he told me almost the exact same story. He told me how in his family, before Passover, before Pesach, every year Louis would drop off chocolates. And he said, this is a young family in the community. The first story with the strawberry cake, somebody more experienced in the community, it's a younger man in the community, telling me that this past Passover through the middle of the COVID situation, so Louis didn't drop off the chocolates, or Louis was no longer in Charleston, so he wasn't able to drop off the chocolates. But he said, they were eating some snacks over the holiday, and his 5-year-old child, 4-year-old child, he turns to him and says, "Are these Uncle Louis's candies?" And that's how the children in the community viewed Uncle Louis. Uncle Louis was a person who cared about them He was a person who would give them the chocolates and the candy. As we mentioned in the prayer of the fear of heaven, and also the life of peace and of goodness, there's an intersection as well. And sometimes that goodness intersects with the fear of heaven. And Louis was a person who on Rosh Hashanah, he would go around blowing the shofar for people. If someone wasn't able to make it to the synagogue, he would blow the shofar for them. Remarkably, he was so devoted to Jewish education that he made sure that his grandchildren and some of his grandchildren were able to attend the Jewish day school. And he himself took to it, made sure that everything would be accounted for, that they would be able to attend the Jewish school. I'm speaking with the grandchildren last night, with Linda and Lisa, and I heard many, many, many stories. It would take hours to share all the stories they shared. Towards the end of the conversation, when I thought the conversation was nearing its end, suddenly we brought up Passover. We brought up the Haggadah, we brought up the Passover Seder, and suddenly there was an outpouring of more and more and more and more stories. And it was just a beautiful thing to hear about his love for the Haggadah, for the text of the Passover Seder, that he really took it upon himself to read through the Haggadah each year as he led the Seder. In this past year where he wasn't able to lead the Seder, so they asked him to put some stickies on the most important parts of the Seder. They wanted him to identify which parts needed to be said. But now that he wasn't running the Seder anymore, maybe you could be a little bit more perhaps efficient. So when he was done with the stickies, putting the little Post-its on the Haggadah, he had put a Post-it on every single page. And every single page of the Haggadah, and I'm sure the same thing is true about the Seder. Every page of the prayers was something that was important to him. It wasn't something that could be skipped. He was told he had a chametz-dik Haggadah, a Haggadah that he would use during the year to prepare for Passover, and he had separate Haggadahs that he would use on Passover itself. Louis, I was told he would call the family for their birthdays. He would always call them the night before, to be the first one to give them their birthday wishes. And he would explain that in Judaism, the Jewish day begins in the evening. So it was legitimate, it was justifiable to call and wish the early birthday greeting the evening before. He was a person that was extremely charitable. We heard about some of the anonymous donations he would give for someone to receive an honor. And there are many, many more donations, things we'll share, perhaps stories that we'll hear during the week of Shiva. But there's so many times that he was there for people, he was willing to help anyone in the community. Louis was born on a Shabbos, and this past Shabbos, his final words were a good Shabbos. And I think it's very fitting that a life of such dignity, integrity, religious devotion would end just as the Jewish weekends with a good Shabbos. And as we transition to our first Shabbos, for most of us, our first Shabbos without Louis in this world, we say the prayer, the Birkas HaKodesh, and we pray that God fill our lives with the same values and the same blessings that Louis personified. May be bound with that which is eternal. And I'll call on the pallbearers to please return as we lower the auto to this final rest. Not actually seeing you, very well. Hey, Bob. What else could I do? Hold up. Let's talk to the wire. That part is. She didn't have to try to get it from the radio, but she's back we were talking,
tough part is that, you know, as time goes on, the people that we're very close to are no longer there. And so the people that we're closer to, because they're much smaller groups. I wasn't sure if it I feel better today. So I was able to rise.
We're going to continue now. Going to continue now with the act of burial. Louis was a person who, during his lifetime, was devoted to a life of mitzvahs, so performing different commandments and mitzvahs. This is a commandment to show respect and honor and a burial, but it's a ritual and a commandment that is done with hesitation. And I would like to share two customs with you that we'll perform as we engage in the act of burial. To show our hesitation, we don't hand the shovels from one person to the other. We place it into the earth. And as we perform the act of burial, we first use the shovel. We do the initial act upside down, of taking the earth and doing it upside down to show our hesitation, and only then proceed to perform the burial in the normal fashion. I'm going to do the first acts. I will demonstrate those two customs, and then I will have members of the family who would like to participate, and then followed by anyone else.
Considered one of the best ministers because it can never be repaid.
She's the house with you, right? Please tell her I asked about it.
I can walk with you.
Chuck. I'm teasing you. Good to see you. Oh no, I'm incognito. Yeah, yeah, Thomas. I think I'm incognito. You know who it was?
Just so safe.
Yeah. I wanted the pearls on everybody take my check. I said I wanted the pearls. And let everybody take my check. Remember? That was Jeffrey, yeah.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
I missed Jeffrey.
Yeah, oh yeah. It's been tough.
You're doing right. You're driving me crazy.
You're lucky to drive.
Don't even.
Under the circumstances bad, but good to see you and you're awesome.
It's looking good.
And, yeah, I know you're looking at you're doing everything right. But they certainly spoil you.
Wonderful, good memory.
Your favor. Same.
Late, but glad that you expect that it's late.
The title was just right now. I wouldn't do this. That's Andrea. I didn't recognize her.
Benny.
Gosh.
I'll release.
Benny. Real estate deal for the lake.
Oh, everybody was checking on that camera. I'll be right back.
I like it. Thanks to you for being such a wonderful brother. What a wonderful man. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Would you say Aaron had surgery?
Yeah.
So sweet. Tell him Edie.
Yeah, she's
Papa, hang on.
working out and trying to get back.
Hey, John.
Hi, I'm Barry Krell.
Sorry to see you under these circumstances.
Sorry? No, I'll go take
Sometimes I forget.
That's beautiful. I could have listened.
Let me ask you,
I
when you were
love
talking,
the way they were
how old
speaking.
was you whenever I presume you don't do it anymore.
How old were you when you quit God? I'm serious. You have any idea?
Yeah, but
No,
my dad
but
was
in that 70s.
At least, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it when she called.
I know, but
Could have been 81.
wow.
Could have been 81.
And the reason it comes out, because we could hardly walk. And we're walking on the beach now, and I always remember.
You can still walk faster than I do.
But that doesn't say. But she could talk. Well, I'm sorry for y'all's loss.
Thank you.
Sir. Elaine, and thank God is doing well. Well, thank you. I certainly will. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Janice recognized you with the mask on.
Give me some Michigan. He was concerned about taking over. That's right, but that's what I'm saying. Anything worthwhile is.
Your wife's name is Rabbi. Probably tell us what I thought. It's better to ask than to call the wrong name. Yeah.
It's good to see you. So good to see you. Really is.
Hey, Judah.
I'm Sue. My father was Uncle Bob. But I am this thank you so
He fell into
It's the vote.
I'm doing better than I 2 months ago. No, I'm just coming back hopefully, you know. But, yeah, I don't know what happened.
I haven't talked to you in forever.
I know. Send phone numbers in. Beach September 1st.
We'll probably see you then. We've been going to the beach lots more. Yeah, we've been going more often. More. The family's been trying to use the house.
Hey, Leon. All right.
Come now and measure the age.
This way. I wasn't very good. And I'm not now. So y'all go to the house, right?
That's my hair. It's my hair if I didn't use the flat iron.
What is it?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You can't.
The same day you did it. I don't think anybody's come on.
So sorry.
Thank you so much. And you put the flag on whatever. It's already Friday. Good deed.
Good. Well, all we have to do whenever it's time. Yep. probably need me to come up it off. That's a long okay.
Ain't no baby.
I wasn't really a baby back then.
You're too young.
It worked out because I was already off today, but I would have come off.
I remember my children.
Sometimes.
If you know that we're expecting,
So keep you busy.
and it is, I was so excited. Oh my God.
Yeah, well, we're getting, well, it's pretty high demand for residents. Well, there's only 500 country offices.
Well, not quite. The city council. But I'm so like, you know, they know.
That's not very many.
I left that
Be safe there.
So Lolly, I didn't recognize Lolly with the mask. And I found somebody last week. The kid in New Jersey, we started chatting for friends. Very good friends, son started the residency. Rachel.
Do I need to go over and
I met her. She's
Here and there.
one thing led to the next last night. You know,
Final prayer or something like that. Don't even go so strong. A lot of people come here and fuck around.
yeah, you're right. I didn't realize that. Maybe it was they got it covered now.
Stanford, how you doing? You look great.
Looks like getting better and better every day.
Gotta try. Looking at it.
No, it's frustrating.
No, I'm just getting mine.
I don't want to, you know, push it. Yeah, I guess he'll remember.
No. It's not you.
So I told Rachel,
Hello, how are you?
you know what, I'm going to get here to a certain end. You know, I'm not going to ask, oh, you didn't ask me. So I just happened to meet people, but we were chatting, and I was like, yeah, Monday. What's that? Every day is different. She's so bored. Yeah, I was watching this morning for a little while, and he just finished work with us, and I thought about him because we get him up the same way, except we don't say anything. They say 1, 2, 3, and then we get up. It's all good, and he's such an asset. So nice to see. Okay, thank him. Looks like the sun is shining now. And I could never change. No, he didn't. He can't walk well enough to manage this.
Because I know he was
Yeah, I know. His walking is very, very tempting. He still drives, but
had a problem with that dizziness.
no, he's having trouble with swallowing. Chokes him, and swallowing.
Yeah.
Complete.
My name is Howard Yates. Lou used to always talk about you. I appreciate it. I like that so much stuff. something like that. Yeah, and always talked about you.
He and I and Benny Goldberg, we worked on a lot of cases together.
Let me call that. Let me call that. Like she did this on our friends over there. He and my father were started to write in the Masons. He talked about the father's Thank you. What's your name? So we're out there. We're up against the problem, whether we can or not. Questionable, but thank you. Sammy.
It's still quicker than me.
Your brother's company, we had so much fun together. Very good.
He's his father's son. Right?
His sister's swimming. Thank you. She lives in our neighborhood.
Your kids, right?
Both sisters are house swimming.
Yeah.
Bunch of sisters.
Yeah. How you doing? All right?
I didn't recognize him.
How's the baby?
Huh? The baby is a 3-year-old now.
3-year-old?
Oh,
wow. That says how much I'm out of it.
No, it's growing so fast.
Yeah.
It surprises me sometimes.
Well, you got my Facebook, right?
Probably.
I got my phone.
Yeah, I put updates on Facebook, and I'm really bad about posting updated pictures. But yeah.
We were just talking about you. Yeah. Well, what number Wentworth does you live on?
133 and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
133 and a half.
Okay.
139.
I ran it.
Yeah, he used to live in 133 and a half.
Pandemic party for so many people who hadn't seen each other forever.
Good Jonathan, my best.
Will do. So how are you?
I'm all right.
You can't rush.
I'm here.
I just didn't know if this like
Someone you have to go.
They just got a place 139.
Do you is mom able to take you back home or did you have to because I got my van with me too.
So I was in those townhouses, not the one on the end, but the one next to it. Yeah, just a little bit. How long have you been in Charleston yet? Got that big house across the street for sale. Yeah.
Did you think that'd still be going?
Yeah, she's in school right now. She loves it. They send me pictures.
She makes friends a lot.
Oh yeah. She tells me about her friends at school.
Oh, really?
You missed that. Flip it over.
Today, they don't have her breakfast things there. Like this was yesterday. Yesterday, you see her with all the kids. Today, that's her right there. They let out butterflies that they have been growing. So they send me picture updates. That's her plan. Basketball, their version of basketball for little kids. Butterfly at school. So, yeah, her daycare's great because they send me updates. They're building play models of butterflies out of here. Water day. So, yeah, and they keep you updated with everything that she's eating.
But you're wearing your clothes. Yeah, that was 90 years ago. Do you want to go up
yeah, I can. That's right. No. These are all. That was her birthday.
My library.
These are all her school stuff where they send me updates. This was at the beach house the other day. Well, not at the beach house, but that was at the beach. That was at the beach. Sultan's Island. Did they give you the whole? So it's called a shabumi. It's a type of like beach shade. It's a type of beach shade. Call them and tell them that we took with us. So see it. It just kind of like sets up as you shade down.
She likes playing with sand and all that.
And we just did, oh my goodness, yes. And she doesn't ever want to leave when we go to the beach because I said she loves the beach house. She just wants to always stay.
I'm going to say the Tzedek HaDin prayer, and then in a moment I'm going to say the Kaddish. There's a special Kaddish that's said at a funeral. It's a little different than the typical mourner's Kaddish. So I have it here, and I'll let you know when it's time. When we'll see
This will be the
this is in the translated in English.
I will.
There's Hebrew.
Yeah, we're planning to do that. She really, it was her idea. She really wanted to, but she was
This
really
one's
blown
more
away.
tricky. Most of it's familiar. You'll see. We're going to get Lisa and Linda back over here too.
I always tell myself a good guy. Chloe's in Denver. She just got her first teaching job. She finished her master's in education.
This is Adrian.
She's good.
I ask for everyone's attention, please. I'm going to recite a prayer that's called the Tzedek HaDin. The Hadin is an acknowledgement divine judgment, and it's a poem written in medieval times. Atzur tamim pa'alo ki chol v'racham mishpat elam u'naviyyin aval tzadik yasharu. Atzur tamim b'chol po'al mi lo mati pa'al hashlit b'matar v'ma'al memisim chayam mari sha'al v'ya'al. Atzur tamim b'chol ma'aser mi yomer ilav ma'ta'aser ha'omer v'yosef chased chinam lam ta'aser u'bizchut ha'kod kesach shiva ba'aser. Tzadik b'chol v'racham atzur tamim erach ha'payim u'lei ba'achamim chamol la b'chusna al b'otzi banim ki l'chad ha'naslichos ba'rachamim. Tzadik atah Adonai l'hamisu l'hachayos Asher b'yadcha pikdon kol rechos. Alidu l'chal zikonenu l'chos b'yunai inecha v'rachamim alenu pikdon ki l'chadon ha'achtim v'aslichos. Adam in ben shana yiyah o elf shnim yichya. Ma'isra lo kilo haya yiyah baruch tayan ha'mes b'misum chaya. Baruch hu ki ha'mes dino m'shadik l'chol be'ino m'shalem l'adam chashma b'dino ha'kol yishmol l'yal b'tunai. V'gam ranu kitzeches v'techa tiftach b'berecha v'tizkeh b'shabtacha V'ilo ha'arach ha'midas chatacha tzadik atah v'nagdi Hashem mishpatacha. V'yan ha'mes shafei tzedek v'ames baruch tayan ha'mes. V'kol mishpatav tzedek v'ames v'chutz b'chav yadecha tzedek malay yimichav yadecha v'achtim al beitas tzon yadecha v'somer l'malach herach yadecha. K'do yitzah b'rav ha'alila asher yinecha p'kuchos al kol derechei b'nei Adam v'asish lish k'drachav v'kifri ma'alelav v'kin ki asher Adonai tzridu evla sabo. V'nei nasan v'nei natach yishim adonai v'rach. I'd like to recite the Kel Malay Rachamim prayer. Kel Malay Rachamim Shochein B'Amromim Amtzei Menucha Nechona Al Katei Hashchina B'Malos Kidoshim U'Tehorim K'Zohar HaKiyah Ma'azirim Es Nishmas Eliezer ben Abraham, Shalach L'olamo, V'gan Eden Tehemenu Chaso, V'achein V'alarachamim Yastirehu V'seiser K'nafav L'yolamim, Yitzror B'Tzror HaChayim Es Nishmaso Adonai Unachaso Yanuach B'Shalom HaMishkavo V'Nomar Amen. We're now going to say the burial Kaddish said by the mourners who will be sitting Shiva. If you're able to stand, stand. If not, sitting is acceptable as well. Miss Adal. We'll start from the beginning again. At this point, we transition from our showing honor to the departed to now focusing on those who remain alive, comfort to their family, and those who are mourning. The Shiva information, the family will be sitting Shiva at the Lee's home, 65 Rebellion Road. Recommended hours for Shiva visiting is from 10 o'clock a.m. until 1 p.m. and then in the evening from 7 until 8:30 p.m. We conclude the service with our transition to the mourning family. So we have a custom of lining up in what's known as a shura in two lines, and the mourners pass between us, and we recite the traditional text of comfort. Hamakom Yinachem Eschem B'Sof Sha'ar Avelitzir B'Yerushalayim. May God provide you comfort among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. So we'll just have people line up here by the sidewalk and allow the family, those who are mourning, to pass through.